Over the last few weeks, we heard from the prophet Jeremiah, and today we hear from two prophets, the prophet Isaiah and Joel, in light of the recent events in the Middle East and the ongoing wars in Gaza and Ukraine. We hear prophets with very different perspectives. Listen to these words from Isaiah chapter 2 and Joel chapter 3. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And from Joel, proclaim this among the nations. Consecrate yourselves for war. Stir up the warriors. Let all the soldiers draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weakling say, I am a warrior. In just a few weeks, we will resurrect and revive that summer series that we do on preaching and movies, so you can stay tuned for that and nominate your favorite if you'd like. I'm not saying we'll do it, but you can at least nominate it. But meanwhile, week before last, I saw one with my grandkids, How to Train Your Dragon. Do you know this movie? It came out in the animated version some time ago, but this is the newer live action version. And I had Colin in Atlanta for the day, and we went to the movies. We settled in. I was in the middle. They were on either side. The popcorn was on my lap, and the hands were going in, and they were watching. If you don't know, How to Train Your Dragon is a fun summer flick. It happens on an island that's kind of remote among a Viking village, and they're infested with dragons. And there's a battle that ensues, and it's that kind of thing. Well, one of the main characters is a boy named Hiccup. That's his name, Hiccup. And he has befriended a dragon that he has nicknamed Toothless. And the dad, who is the chief of the village, is a little bit put out that his son is not becoming a great dragon slayer, but instead has befriended a dragon. And it ends with a sort of happily ever after, so I won't ruin it in case you're looking for something to do on a hot afternoon. But there you have it. Now, here's the thing about the best kids' movies. The kids are watching it on this level, but if adults are paying attention, the best ones have something else going on. And in this case, I think it is commentary on the horrors of war, the complexities of war. It's incredible. I mean, for example, they tackle toxic masculinity. The dad, the chief of the village, his name is Stoic. It fits very well, and he is bigger than life. And all he wants is for his son to be a great dragon slayer, not to make friends with dragons. As you probably know and maybe have read over the years, there have been speculative articles and studies here and there as to would female world leaders put us in war as much as male leaders do? Hard to say, except maybe mass shootings are something of an indication. But not just this toxic masculinity, it also takes on xenophobia, fear of the other, the stranger, the unknown. Hiccup, the boy, at one point says to his dad, what if the dragons are as scared of us as we are of them, and we just keep fighting each other because we don't understand each other? Which is a powerful word about how we don't always understand others, and yet we sort of imagine that maybe all peoples everywhere want to live in peace and to have their families and raise them up and enjoy life. Although, to be fair, there have always been disturbed, unstable world leaders on the stage, and that doesn't mean that the people that live there are. It's a complicated topic. In the last 2 weeks, we saw another war rise up, and thankfully peace is now holding, but it was joining the likes of the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine. What are we to make of this? How do we make sense of war? When you come to the Bible and you read, in this case, two prophets with entirely different worldviews, you kind of wonder, well, what am I supposed to do with that? Well, it helps to remember that this is not a book. It looks like a book, but it's a library of books written by different people over different periods of time with different perspectives. They do not agree. When it comes to war, Isaiah has an entirely different picture. It's actually interesting, though, that Isaiah and Joel have some things in common. They both start with a notice, a declaration that what they're about to say comes from God, even if they have very different views. And not just that, the Mount Zion reference. The Mount of Zion plays an image here. It plays a role. It's the place of God. It's the Mount of God. But that's where the similarities stop. Isaiah pictures God as a wise judge or a patient teacher of wisdom who lives on the mountain and is wooing the nations to come up and to learn no more war. On the other hand, Joel pictures God and the nations coming down from the mountain, and God is a warrior who will declare war on these other peoples. So what are we supposed to do with that? Isaiah pens, his, by the way, was the first vision. It was written before Joel. And he pens one of the most famous lines. It's on that sculpture outside of the UN. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Well, Joel knows that verse. He knows it. Everybody knows it. And he takes the exact same words and reverses it and says, no. We're going to take the farming implements and we're going to make weapons. So how do we make sense of it? You probably don't know this name, but he's the greatest American-born theologian. His name was Reinhold Niebuhr, who just by coincidence was born not that far from Whiteman Air Force Base. He coined a term still popular among theologians, Christian realism. What he said was, yeah, Jesus calls us to love our enemies, not kill them. But, he said, sometimes war is the lesser of the evils. Niebuhr was writing about Hitler's Nazi Germany. And this is what Bonhoeffer and the others wrestled with. Could it be right to assassinate someone, to kill someone in the name of a better, bigger good? Christian realism is also why even pacifists should be grateful for the men and women who serve in the military, because it's called realism. But it still raises the question of what do you do when you have one text declaring peace and another declaring war over against one another? Well, besides remembering it's a library, I think the other clue that theologians give is if you're stuck between two, lean toward love. Lean toward the lens of love. The tenderness of God, and the tenderness of God not just for you and yours, but for all peoples. If you can lean toward that, you probably have a better chance. There's a piece of the movie that there were so many things going on when I was watching it besides the popcorn on my lap, but there were pieces where I reflected like over days, and one of them was the title. It didn't hit me for several days. Why did they call it How to Train Your Dragon? Why didn't they call it How to Train a Dragon? How to Train Your Dragon? I don't have a dragon. Why do I need to see a movie on how to train my dragon? I don't have one. Then I wondered, what if that's the point? What if it's acknowledging the dragon that lives in all of us, and that if pushed at certain points, we say, we ought to. You know what I'm saying? The dragon in all of us that finds it easier sometimes to resort to violence than peace. That was one of the things I talked with Matt Naylor about this week. Matt Naylor, as some of you know, is a member of our church, and he's the CEO of the World War I Museum. We were emailing back and forth, and he sent me some talking points, and one of them was this very thing. It is easier to wage war than to make peace in the world, no question. But I really loved it because of what happens in the poem by Isaiah. It's actually a poem. And in Hebrew, if you could diagram it, set on its side, it almost resembles the Mount of Zion. And at the peak of the mountain is this verse, that we will learn the ways of God, which is beautiful but not complete, and walk in them. We'll not just know about peace, we'll pursue it, we'll make it, we'll live it. You know, you can tour a war museum. I did again this week. But it's a whole lot harder to live one, to live peace. So last Monday, Reverend Ashley Chang sent me an email. It had a quote from Eisenhower and a little note that said, it says it's from Eisenhower, but you might want to check it out. It's the internet, you know. And so I did. I did what you would do. I Googled it, and sure enough, it's authentic. This is what President Eisenhower said 3 months into office. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired, signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and not clothed. And what hit me so hard about that was that he had been a general in the war. Here was a retired Army general saying these things. It was 3 months into office. Stalin had just died. Russia had the bomb. We had the bomb. And at the beginning of his administration and at the end, he gave 2 speeches in which he said this very thing, that we should think about military spending that comes at the expense of social programs, which seems like something worth debating on a budget bill. So in the movie, How to Train Your Dragon, Toothless, the dragon, well, Hiccup realizes he's missing part of his tail. So he builds a prosthetic for his dragon. And then at the end of the movie, when Hiccup has tried so hard to keep war from happening, you notice that he too has lost part of his leg, and he has a prosthetic, which of course instantly made me think about soldiers who come home without limbs. But more than that, so much more than that, so many soldiers come home with their souls crushed and their psyche just smashed to pieces, shattered. And thankfully, there are ministries and counseling services for PTSD and soldiers, and that is one of the great ways to serve our military and to help them, to support them. So when I was doing my PhD, I took a year-long seminar on the intersection of Christianity and culture. Everybody in the seminar had to pick one topic that we would investigate for an entire year on how Christianity, the church, had dealt with this one issue throughout history. I chose War and Peace. And it was a very long paper written over a year, but they fell into 2 categories. There were preachers in the mold of Isaiah who preached peace, and there were preachers in the mold of Joel who said, yeah, but the infidel has to be killed. There was only one exception that I remember. He was a minister during the Vietnam War, and his son had come home from that war in a coffin. And he said, now is the time to cry, to lament what war does. I was thinking about that because I guess maybe 2 months ago I watched a different movie. It was on Netflix, probably still is, a 5-part documentary on the Vietnam War called Turning Point. And I remember it was so powerful that halfway through I texted Matt Naylor and said, you got to check this out. It's very well done. I was just a little bit too young to be in Vietnam, but I remember my friends whose older brothers went. Well, in this one scene, I have no clue which episode it was, they interviewed this black soldier who's come home from the war. He's lived, he's made it. And he points out how ironic it was and frustrating to be fighting for the freedom of South Vietnamese when back home he didn't have all of his civil rights. But then he tells a story about his buddy that he served with who didn't come home. And he says that when he got back, he went to that black wall of granite in D.C. with 58,000 names on it. And he found his friend's name, and he put his finger there. But he did not say to his fallen comrade what people had said to him, "Thank you for your service." He said he just couldn't do it. Instead, he put his finger on that name, and he said, "I'm sorry."